I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of unspoken betrayals. The message arrived early that morning, ordinary in tone, polite in wording, almost thoughtful. It explained that she would not make it to his birthday. Work was tight. Pressure everywhere. Long hours ahead. Nothing dramatic. Nothing cruel on the surface. He read it once, then again, and answered with calm restraint. No problem. 2 words that carried no complaint, no protest, and no demand. At that moment, he truly believed the message meant very little. An hour later, while scrolling without intention, something unexpected appeared on his screen. Bright colors, smiling faces, a table crowded with gifts. Balloons filled the background. It was not a quiet gathering or a rushed apology of an event. It was loud in spirit, generous in display, carefully staged for attention. He paused, noticing the detail, the effort, the joy that had clearly required time, money, and energy that supposedly did not exist earlier that morning. The caption made everything clear. The celebration was not for family. It was not for obligation. It was for her boss. The same hours that were unavailable for him had suddenly expanded elsewhere. The same budget that was tight had loosened easily. He did not feel anger. He felt clarity settling in slowly, like weight shifting inside the chest. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a choice made without hesitation. The day quietly changed its meaning. It was no longer about a birthday missed or a plan canceled. It became about recognition and priority. He noticed how calm he remained, how his breathing stayed steady, how there was no urge to confront or react. Experience teaches patience, especially when disappointment arrives without shouting. He understood that moments like this do not require immediate response. They require memory. By the time he put the phone down, something had settled permanently. He did not rehearse arguments. He did not prepare explanations. He simply accepted that nothing from this point forward would be handled loudly. Silence would do the work words no longer could. The message from the morning truly should not have mattered. But what followed revealed everything that did. He stood by the window for a moment, watching the day continue without ceremony. Cars passed. Life moved normally. Inside him, however, a quiet line had been crossed. Not broken, not dramatic, simply final. Some realizations arrived softly, yet changed the direction of a life forever, without asking permission, silently. The house was quiet when he returned to the living room. The afternoon light softened the furniture and filled the room with a stillness that felt heavier than usual. His son sat on the floor surrounded by colored pencils, pretending to draw, but glancing at him with a seriousness that did not belong to a child. He placed his phone face down on the table and sat beside him, trying to appear composed even though his mind was still replaying the images he had just seen. The boy lifted his drawing and showed a small cake with only one candle. It was simple and crooked, but full of sincerity. He asked if they were still celebrating or if he should save the picture for another time. The question was innocent. Yet behind it lived the awareness of someone who had watched his father being overlooked more than once. The man felt something soften and tighten inside him at the same time. A few minutes passed in silence before the boy spoke again. He did not ask about her. He did not ask about the work excuse. He simply asked if they had forgotten him again. There was no accusation in his voice, only concern. The man felt the truth settle between them, quiet and undeniable. He wanted to explain, to protect his son from adult disappointment, but the words would not form. Instead, he placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and allowed the moment to breathe. The child returned to his drawing and added small stars around the candle, trying to brighten a picture that felt too honest. The man watched the careful movements of his hand, realizing that children often understand what adults try to ignore. They see who shows up. They see who leaves. They see the difference between excuses and effort long before they learn the words to name it. Later, when they set the table for dinner, the boy insisted on placing the small drawing at the center. He said it made the room look complete. The man nodded and felt something shift inside him, a quiet recognition that the people who value you rarely speak the loudest. Sometimes they sit beside you with crayons and honest questions that break through every layer of denial. In that moment, he understood that clarity often arrives through a voice that still believes love should be simple. The evening unfolded slowly, as if time itself had decided to move with deliberate calm. He walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge, not searching for anything special, only for what was already there. He chose simple ingredients and prepared a quiet meal. The familiar sounds of chopping and simmering filled the house and created a sense of order that had been missing all afternoon. His son watched from the doorway, waiting for signs of frustration, but he found none. The man stirred the pot with steady movements and invited him to help set the table. They ate together without ceremony. The boy talked about school, about a friend who brought a pet rabbit to class, and about a drawing contest he wanted to enter. The man listened with attention, grateful for the distraction and grateful for the company. The absence was noticeable, yet the room did not feel empty. It felt balanced in a way that surprised him. He realized that some evenings become meaningful not because of who is missing, but because of who remains present. After dinner, he brought out the small cake he had bought earlier. It was not extravagant, but the single candle shone warmly. His son insisted on lighting it and sang with a sincerity that made the moment feel complete. The man closed his eyes for a second, not to make a wish, but to acknowledge the strange comfort settling inside his chest. When he opened them, he saw the boy smiling with pride, as if he had personally rescued the evening from disappointment. They shared the cake in silence, each bite sweetening the heaviness of the day. The man felt calm, not because everything was fine, but because he finally saw things clearly. There was no blame to offer and no arguments to prepare. The truth had already spoken through actions. When he cleaned the plates and placed them on the counter, he sensed something inside him quietly shift. The part of him that always justified her decisions had grown thin, and tonight it finally disappeared. He sat on the couch afterward while his son built a small tower of blocks beside him. The house felt peaceful, not joyful, not sad, simply honest. That night he understood he had not lost control. He had only lost the last excuse that kept him from seeing the situation for what it truly was. As the evening settled into a slower rhythm, he sat on the couch while his son finished building a tower on the carpet. The television played softly in the background, more for company than entertainment. He reached for his phone, not expecting anything new, only intending to check the time. Instead, the screen lit up with fresh notifications. More posts, more celebration, more reminders that the story he had been told earlier carried a different truth beneath it. The first new photo showed a table overflowing with gourmet dishes placed under bright lights. Glasses sparkled. Plates were arranged with care. A group of people stood around the table raising their drinks with confidence and comfort. His eyes moved to her face in the corner of the frame. She looked relaxed, engaged, almost glowing. Her expression showed no sign of a long or stressful day. She was at ease in a space that demanded nothing from her except her presence. A second post followed minutes later. This one captured a moment mid-laughter. Someone had told a joke, and the entire group leaned back with genuine amusement. She stood close to her boss, shoulder angled toward him, clearly absorbed in the moment. The contrast between her energy there and her distance earlier was sharp enough to feel like a statement. Not aggressive, not intentional, simply revealing. The man observed quietly. He did not zoom in. He did not check the comments. He did not scroll through the list of people who liked or shared the images. Instead, he let the truth speak for itself. His breathing remained steady. Nothing inside him broke. Instead, something settled in a way he could not ignore. These pictures were not a betrayal of loyalty. They were an illustration of priority. A final image appeared, taken at the end of the evening. She stood with a gift bag in her hand, smiling at something off camera. It was a proud smile, comfortable and carefree, the kind that belonged to someone who felt appreciated and valued in the company she chose. He did not feel anger. He felt acknowledgement. He took a quiet moment, then saved the picture. Not for confrontation, not for accusation, for memory. Some truths are not meant to be argued. They are meant to be remembered exactly as they appear. The house grew calmer as the night progressed. His son had fallen asleep on the couch, curled beneath a blanket, breathing softly. He lifted him gently and carried him to his room, taking a moment to tuck him in before returning to the living room. The silence that followed was not heavy. It was purposeful. He sat at the table with a glass of water and opened his laptop, not out of habit, but out of intention. He did not call her. He did not ask where she was or when she planned to return. Instead, he reviewed the things he had been postponing for too long. He began with the household accounts. He adjusted shared passwords and updated financial records that had been ignored for months. What started as a simple task expanded into a full review of what belonged to whom and what responsibilities had been left unattended. He worked steadily, making decisions with calm precision. Later, he checked the family calendar. Appointments, school activities, bills coming due. He noticed how many events he had carried alone over the past year, moments he had justified without questioning. Tonight those habits no longer felt reasonable. They felt weighted and imbalanced. He reorganized schedules to reflect reality rather than expectation. This was not spite. It was clarity applied through action. He moved next to the storage room where old boxes waited untouched. Inside were papers he had meant to sort, documents connected to plans he had delayed because other priorities always took precedence. He opened each box with quiet purpose, sorting what mattered and discarding what did not. Every decision felt like reclaiming a small piece of himself that had been misplaced through compromise. When he finished, he returned to the living room and sat for a long moment, letting the stillness settle in the space around him. Nothing he had done was dramatic. Nothing would be noticed immediately. Yet everything carried significance. The balance had shifted, not through anger, but through organization. Through preparation. He closed the laptop, placed the sorted papers in a drawer, and exhaled slowly. Tonight, he had not waited for explanations. He had built structure. He had built direction. By the time the clock reached midnight, the quiet work of a few hours had already changed the shape of the days ahead. At 9 in the evening, the house had settled into a peaceful rhythm. The lights were dim, the dishes were washed, and the day felt as if it were finally drifting toward rest. He sat in the living room reading while the soft hum of the refrigerator filled the background. Then the knocking came. It was sharp at first, then insistent, each hit against the door carrying panic that did not belong to a celebration. He looked up, closed his book, and waited without moving. The knocking continued, louder the second time. He listened carefully, hearing her voice through the wood, shaky and rushed. The confidence seen in the photos earlier was nowhere to be found. Her words tumbled over each other, asking him to open the door, asking if he was there, asking if they could talk. He remained seated for a moment, letting the urgency settle. He felt no cruelty in waiting. He felt clarity. When he finally stood and walked toward the door, he did so with steady steps. He unlocked it slowly and pulled it open just enough to meet her eyes. She stood on the porch with her hair still styled from the event, but her expression was unsettled. Her breathing was quick, her hands nervous. The contrast between the images he had seen earlier and the person standing before him was striking. She began speaking immediately, trying to offer explanations all at once. Something about co-workers insisting she stay, something about losing track of time, something about misunderstanding. The words spilled out rapidly, trying to fill the silence between them. He did not interrupt. He did not soften. He watched her with a calm expression that offered no entry point for excuses. The silence grew heavier. Her voice weakened. She stepped forward as if seeking reassurance, but he held his position. He did not raise his voice. He did not question her. His calmness unsettled her more deeply than anger ever could. She looked at him as if the quiet itself were a verdict. For the first time in their marriage, she realized he was no longer pleading for understanding. He had none to ask for. Silence had taken the place of every argument they had repeated over the years. And in that silence, she felt the consequence of choices made long before 9 in the evening. She stepped into the living room with hesitation, as if the walls themselves were judging her. The confidence she carried hours earlier had vanished, replaced by a trembling uncertainty. She began speaking before he even sat down, filling the space with explanations that changed direction each time she sensed they were failing. She talked about pressure at work, about expectations placed on her, about colleagues who insisted she stay longer than intended. Her voice moved quickly, hoping speed could blur the truth. When she saw he remained silent, she shifted to justification. She described how the event was necessary for her career, how participating might open new doors, how she thought it would be harmless. Her eyes searched his face for softness, for a sign she could still steer the conversation. She found none. He stood with the quiet posture of someone who had stopped participating in a struggle long before the other person noticed. Her tone cracked. Tears appeared not from grief, but from fear of losing a familiar power. She cried as she spoke, reaching for moments from their past, hoping memories might protect her from the present. She blamed fatigue, blamed confusion, blamed pressure. She tried everything except accountability. Each explanation drifted into the room like smoke, unable to hold shape. He did not interrupt. He did not accuse her of anything. His silence created boundaries she had never faced from him. He listened in the way people listen when a decision has already been made, when the words being offered no longer have the ability to change understanding. His calmness forced her to hear herself, and that was more confronting than any argument he could have delivered. She sat down slowly, realizing the conversation was no longer under her direction. The dynamic that had defined their marriage had shifted without a single raised voice. He was no longer defending feelings she had disregarded. He was not negotiating for respect she chose to delay. The room felt different because the balance inside him had changed. For the first time, it was her waiting for his reaction, her feeling the weight of uncertainty, her realizing that silence could hold a far deeper truth than confrontation. The moment belonged to him, not through dominance, but through clarity. Justice arrived without noise, and she knew it. The house was quiet again when she finally stopped talking. The tension that had filled every corner slowly dissolved, leaving behind a strange calm that felt more truthful than anything spoken that night. He stood near the window, looking out at the street where the last trace of daylight had disappeared. Nothing in the room seemed changed, yet everything inside him had shifted. He understood now that the evening had revealed more than disappointment. It had shown a pattern he had ignored for too long. This birthday was never about a cake or a celebration. It was not about money spent elsewhere or time offered to someone else. It was a reflection of values and priorities, the kind that eventually surface no matter how carefully they are hidden. He realized that respect is not measured by words. It is measured by presence, by actions, by the willingness to show up when it matters.